This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks came close to touching a one-month high today. Gains were largely driven by data that showed that China posted a better-than-expected trade balance in March. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks rose about 1.1% on the day. That's its highest level since March 16. But of course, investors still remain wary as the coronavirus pandemic continues to ravage the global economy. Now, South Africa's JSE tracked Asian markets today. In Nigeria, the all-share was boosted by large-cap stocks Dangote Cement and MTN Group. Both climbed over 3% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, South Africa cuts its main lending rate by 100 basis points amid an ongoing nationwide lockdown. The IMF paints a grim picture for the global economy as the world fights the coronavirus pandemic. And some 1.5 million Egyptians will receive a monthly stipend from now until June. Well, let's kick off today's show in South Africa, where the central bank has slashed its main lending rate by another 100 basis points to a record low 4.25%. The surprise move by the South African Reserve Bank comes less than a month after its last 100 basis points rate cut. This was in response to the economic impact of the novel coronavirus, which is expected to push the economy into a deep recession. Now, the bank initially projected the economy could shrink by as much as 4% in 2020 due to the pandemic as well as a nationwide lockdown. Since the lockdown was extended by another 2 weeks, the Monetary Policy Committee now sees the economy contracting by 6.1%. Well, let's take today's decision apart with Angelo Coppola. He now joins us in Johannesburg. Great to have you on the show, Angelo. Now, of course, today's surprise decision to cut rates a second time this month, clearly a response to the extension of that lockdown. What was the tone and reasoning behind the Reserve Bank's announcement today, Angelo?
Well, Uche, a couple of changes from the norm to start with. Of course, nobody was at the Reserve Bank to do the presentation, to attend it. So all the governors were in their respective homes. So it was a lot more relaxed. The governor, in fact, wasn't wearing a jacket, just as a point of interest. But there were other norms that were different. What caught the market by surprise essentially was the fact that the meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee actually took place several weeks early, in fact, nearly a month early than was expected. Secondly, and perhaps more telling, the announcement of the 100 basis points cut was announced before the announcement of the press conference. So the governor went through the process that he normally goes through, but we already knew up front that there was going to be that 100 bips cut. The governor did explain that this was to reduce any speculation in the markets as well as any volatility in terms of the currency or the markets themselves. There was a bit of overreaction on the market side, but despite this, the Rand US dollar spot rate actually didn't like the announcement very much, and it was coupled with the discussion that the finance minister had just after the rate cut announcement press conference was held. I asked the governor why the rate cut and why the drop now, and he explained essentially it had everything to do when from the last Thursday announcement by the president that the state of lockdown would be extended for another 21 days. He also let slip the fact that it was a unanimous decision, but it took the board, the MPC board, a whole weekend, a whole Easter long weekend to reach that decision. Uche?
Well, Angelo, it's interesting to see how the MPC also changed some of those economic indicators. It says it now sees the economy contracting by 6.1% this year, and that's from an earlier projection of 2 to 4%. So how is this extension impacting its forecasts of key economic indicators, and what does that say about the depth of SA's impending recession?
Well, look, as far as the governor is concerned, all bets are off. The scale of that contraction, that 6.1% contraction, in comparison to what was predicted, and in fact, just 3 weeks ago, is huge. It's monstrous. 2%. In fact, there was a 0.2% announcement on contraction 3 weeks ago to this 6.1% contraction. So a massive shift in the wrong direction. We're now seeing expected growth in GDP to recover and rebound slightly for 2021 to 2.2% and then 2.7% for 2022. In fact, the governor said the extension had probably made any type of forecasting a challenge because we're now entering what is known as uncharted territory. He did confirm that the remaining MPC meetings scheduled were in place and intact for the rest of the year. But then again, you know, anything could happen to change that schedule again. So we are expecting some more deep, dark days ahead, Uche.
Well, according to a number of experts, given the poor state of South Africa's public finances, the onus, or rather all eyes, will be on monetary policy going forward to do more of that heavy lifting. So did we see from the Apex Bank new measures coming out to mitigate the economic impact of the lockdown today?
Well, Uche, you'll recall that the SARB, or the Reserve Bank, has been in the secondary market buying bonds for the last couple of weeks now. And this rate cut is seen as just an extension of that activity. The bank, of course, have said that they will stay the course and that they will keep inflation in that target range of 2 to 6%. And they expect to do so. He's quite confident that they will be able to do their job there and keep to their mandate. Of course, you'll realize that they aren't allowed to do anything else. And that includes simply printing more money, as some commentators were suggesting perhaps that the Reserve Bank governor should do. He called that, he had some choice words around that topic. Kganyago, of course, went on to make the point in his speech about monetary policy, saying, and I'll quote loosely here, that monetary policy can't improve the potential growth rate of the economy on its own or reduce fiscal risks. That should be addressed by implementing prudent, as he called it, macroeconomic policies and structural reforms. So that sentiment was repeated by the finance minister a little after the closure of the press conference on the rate cut. He spoke to journalists a little after that. That was the finance minister, saying that they're looking at a range of opportunities here in terms of loans. They're looking at the IMF, for example, but they're not looking at loans that come with strings attached. They're looking at loans that relate specifically to dealing with the crisis around COVID-19. Uche.
Well, as always, great to have your insights, Angelo. That's Angelo Coppola joining us in Johannesburg. Well, let's head to Kenya now, where restrictions on foreigners coming into the country, as well as limits on the movement of people across counties, have hit the tourism sector hard. Hotels are now reporting occupancy rates of well below 10%. Tourism is amongst Kenya's leading foreign exchange earners. It brings in about $1.6 billion. That's according to last year's numbers. Now, the government says it has set aside funds of about $5 million, which will be used to help revive the sector. Well, let's take this apart further with Kenya's Minister for Tourism and Wildlife, Najib Balala. He joins us now via Zoom. Great to have you on the show with us, Minister. Now, give us some insight into the extent of the impact that the spread of COVID-19 has had on Kenya's tourism sector. What specific segments are facing the greatest risk of collapse right now?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here on this station, and I'm glad that we are discussing about the impact of COVID-19. Definitely, tourism has been hit hard. If you combine tourism and $2 billion at the moment is frozen. There is no hotels or restaurants or conservancies or national parks are open for the time being because of the 21 days stay-at-home policy. So all these facilities are not working currently. So it's a $2 billion annually, which has been frozen. Tourism so far is 10% of the GDP, but the impact it has is beyond 20% of the GDP. And 9% of employment in the country is tourism. Yes, we have been affected, but the current situation is bad. And what is happening is how do we keep jobs? That's the agenda we have. So the strategy we have is, what do we do now? Now we, the tourism industry and the government are working together. We contain the situation now. Everybody stays at home safely. Our workers in the industry must stay at home safely so that we can be able to stop the spread of this virus. Then we have a post-corona strategy, campaign strategy, which is the $5 million we have allocated, but it's too early now talk about post-corona event. Post-corona will come at a later date, but how do we keep them now? The industry, I had a meeting with the industry, over 200 people attended the meeting, and we had also a large web and internet networks. And we said, what does the industry want? The industry is requesting for several issues. One is, how can the government support them in the cash flow to keep the employees on board? Some of them will be sent on leave. After leave, what do they do? Who comes in and saves the industry?
Well, Minister, we know that the government has set aside some 500 million shillings, which they say will go towards helping revive the tourism sector. Where do you plan to channel those funds in order to ensure that the growth and survival of the industry takes place once, of course, we're done with this pandemic?
Well, when we are done with the pandemic, definitely there'll be 200 million goes for PR and 300 million for in-market programs. So we have a clear strategy of how we want to launch ourselves. But remember, there'll be a new world order. So the new world order is, we need to change. Yes, Uche.
Well, given that Kenya is in the middle of its coronavirus response right now, what conversations are stakeholders in Kenya's tourism sector having at this moment, especially regarding actionable solutions in order to support the industry?
Well, the government has already given a stimulus package. It has reduced the VAT and personal tax and corporate tax as well. So it has reduced from 30 to 25%. And then VAT from government has just come in, and also given almost $100 million in support of the vulnerables and the orphans. So that is just the beginning the government has worked on. We are working on the second tranche of stimulus package, because we appreciate that there'll be utilities to be deferred. There'll be taxes to be deferred. There'll be cash flows required for keeping the employees. So all those issues are on the table at the moment. And
well, it looks like we've lost the minister there. We'll certainly try and get that back on board in a few minutes. Well, let's move on now to another story coming out of Kenya. The flour export industry is feeling the impact from the coronavirus pandemic. Exports are reeling from operational losses as we see hundreds of workers count job losses due to that downshift in demand. Well, Terry Wangari has the details on that story.
Kenya is among the world's top flour producers due to its top-tier climate, but demand has in recent times been on the decline following the outbreak of the coronavirus. Situated 40 minutes from the central business district, Redlands Roses is among the firms reeling from the downshift in orders and demand.
So beginning March, we started seeing a reduction in terms of the orders that were being made. By the time we got to around 20th of March, we were almost at 15% of our normal supply to Europe especially. And the other markets, of course, followed suit.
Like many other farms in Kenya, Redlands Roses has been forced to dump 4,000 to 20,000 stems of roses on a daily basis. The giant lumps of flowers gradually rot and turn into fertilizer, resulting in tremendous losses to the farm.
So the management had to sit down and figure out how are we going to survive through these tough times. Because regardless of whether there are orders or not, there are still operational costs at the farm. Normally, staff work here for 6 days a week. So now they can only work here part-time for 3 days a week.
Despite this, there is a rising silver lining for the industry that could turn around the fate of the perishable commodity.
In the last 3 weeks, we have seen that market opening up, as we have seen the number of infections in China dropping, so the demand has also come up. The Chinese market is an important market for us. It's a market that we have grown and we are continuing to grow.
Since we got our last order from China, which was towards the beginning or end of January, there has been no order from China this whole time until now in April. So last week on Sunday, we got our first order from China, which was a really good thing. So last week we got an order of 15 boxes, which is a really big improvement. So hopefully things are getting better.
Despite Asian markets representing a small glimmer of hope, the industry is facing a cumbersome challenge. It doesn't have enough freighters to transport all these orders.
So the new issue that we are dealing with, we have orders, but we cannot service the market because we do not have enough cargo planes to ferry our flowers from Nairobi to all those destinations. We have a capacity of about 1,200 tons at the moment, yet the demand is at about 3,500 tons.
The revival of the industry could mean workers who lost their jobs could now be employed again. All that remains is for stakeholders to figure out a way to boost freight capacity to elevate the sector. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's now shift focus to our corporate headlines for the day. Shell has lifted a force majeure on exports of Nigeria's Forcados crude oil. A force majeure is a clause that is included in contracts to remove liability for natural and unavoidable catastrophes. Now, the pipeline was shut down on April 4th. 2 days later, Shell declared a force majeure. The Forcados terminal has had a long history of shutdowns in the past. The pipeline was shut down in May 2018 for repairs over heavy leakages. And ABSA Kenya has restructured $78.41 million worth of loans in a bid to cushion its customers who have been hit hard by the coronavirus crisis. Now, the relief applies to personal loans, mortgages, asset finance, credit cards, as well as business loans. The Kenyan lender is the first to disclose the impact of the health crisis on its loan book, following a loosening of the rules by the central bank last month. And Kenya Airways is contesting a government deal which allows Ethiopian Airlines to operate passenger planes grounded by the coronavirus for shipment of cargo. The loss-making Kenyan airline has said the new deal will give the rival carrier undue advantage. Now, Kenya has frozen international passenger travel in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, leaving cargo as the only revenue driver. And Amazon.com says it will expand its hiring spree by an additional 75,000 workers in a bid to meet a demand. The online retailer says it has already filled 100,000 previously announced temporary and full-time positions. The hiring spree and a temporary $2 an hour wage boost will likely cost more than $500 million. This is up from a prior estimate of $350 million. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let us head into a short break now. Still to come. The IMF sets aside $1 billion for Ghana and $442 million for Senegal in the fight against COVID-19. And face mask prices are shooting through the roof in Egypt.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan.
Hello, Naro.
This
Well, of course.
is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, the International Monetary Fund has approved $1 billion in emergency funding for Ghana and $442 million for Senegal. The funds will help the West African nations address urgent fiscal and balance of payments needs, as well as catalyze support from other development partners in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. This comes after the fund announced immediate debt relief for 25 nations across the world. The debt relief will be funded by the IMF's Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust. Now, the trust was first set up to combat the West Africa Ebola outbreak in 2015. It has been repurposed to help countries fend off COVID-19. Well, CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi now takes a look at other nations that stand to benefit from the IMF Coronavirus Fund.
The African countries that will benefit from the debt relief include Rwanda, the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The IMF says the relief, worth about $215 million, should be able to cover their IMF debt obligations for an initial phase of over the next 6 months. There's also a possibility to extend it to 2 years. The relief will help countries to channel more of their resources towards vital medical facilities as well as other relief efforts. The African Union has also called for a comprehensive stimulus package for Africa, including deferred payments and the immediate suspension of interest payments on Africa's external and public and private debt. Ethiopia has also asked for about $150 billion in health financing and budgetary support from the World Bank for the whole continent during this COVID-19 period. The UN Economic Commission for Africa is only projecting economic recovery after about 24 to 36 months. It also says the continent needs about $100 billion in immediate emergency financing for COVID-19 response. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, Well, let's head to Egypt now. The country has seen a significant growth in the manufacture of items needed to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Demand for face masks has shot up in the nation, and as CGTN Adel El Mahrouri reports, the prices of some brands have increased exponentially.
In a country like Egypt, where citizens cannot afford to stay at home during the pandemic, people try to take as much care as possible. Millions take to the streets daily, and many of them resort to using face masks for protection. Overnight, the face mask has turned from an item that collects dusts on pharmacies' shelves to one of the most wanted ones in Egypt.
Our factory's main focus used to be surgical gowns and clothes. Face masks represented 2% to 5% of our production. It was merely an accessory, so we can have complete sets. We used to produce from 20,000 masks to 50,000. Today, we are at 150,000 masks a day.
Egypt was not prepared for that huge rise in demand for face masks. Some manufacturers have shifted their production lines to join that booming sector, putting pressure on raw materials and industrial machinery.
We ran out of stock for basic production material. At first we managed to import through flights, but now it's impossible with the flights lockdown. After we found a domestic producer that is covering our needs, we are now having issues with spare parts of the machines that are operating all day long.
Government and military industrial arms have joined the face mask production. The armed forces have been distributing at least one mask for every passenger taking the underground.
Public demand, however, remains much bigger, which of course affected the prices, which have seen phenomenal increase. Take this box, for example, of 50 masks. It used to cost 80 US cents before COVID-19. This week, pharmacies sell it at $32. That's 40 times more expensive.
Price of almost all other medical protective kits have soared as well. This is one of only 10 other registered factories in Egypt. Dozens more operate in the shadows. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, aid agencies are warning that more than half of South Sudan's population is facing a serious food shortage and that the situation might worsen as the global coronavirus pandemic continues. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet reporting.
First came the flooding late last year, then the locust invasion that worsened the economic crisis in South Sudan followed. Add to that the 6 years of civil war that has already devastated agricultural production at household levels, leading to hunger and acute malnutrition. The situation has forced South Sudan's government to seek help from aid agencies to assist those in need. But the challenge is getting aid to the needy.
But we're trying to do it in a place which is incredibly difficult, where the paucity of infrastructure, the inability for people to get access to markets, to actually leave their community to trade, is, I think, one of the hardest places in the world today.
The United Nations says it is still providing shelter to more than 180,000 South Sudanese displaced people. South Sudan's government says more than 1.2 million people are living in internally displaced people's camps in the capitals of the 10 states in the country. Juba says with coronavirus in the country now, the displaced people should return to their own homes to avoid crowding.
We totally depend on food distributed by aid agencies like WFP. I don't go to the market because I don't have money to buy anything. The food is okay for us adults, but my children always complain after eating for a week. They say they are tired of eating the same thing, but we have no other option.
Most food consumed in South Sudan is imported from neighboring countries. With measures being put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19, many countries are reducing their export preserving food as they prepare for a possible longer period of lockdowns. South Sudan's Relief and Rehabilitation Commission says reduction in import of food will negatively affect the food security situation in South Sudan. At the displaced people's camps, aid agencies say they are putting up measures to stop the spread of coronavirus.
At the entry point, what we actually ensure it is happening is our beneficiaries that are coming to receive our ratio first start by hand washing. Everyone that comes for this food ratio receiving has to actually make sure washes their hands with the soap, and then comes and sits in a queue on chairs and ensuring that at least a distance of 1 to 3 meters is being observed.
South Sudan's government says it is concerned that food insecurity in the country could lead to cattle rustling and intercommunal violence. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, South Africa's auto sector may have to lay off nearly 40,000 people because of the COVID-19 lockdown. This comes as authorities enforce measures to manage virus infection rates. Here's Angelo Coppola picking up that story.
If the lockdown continues beyond the end of April, it could have severe repercussions in the auto sector.
We've suspended production. There are no vehicles that are sold currently at all, nor are they maintained. Our export book is in bad shape because we are not able to send vehicles out of the country. So we cannot obviously afford any extension beyond the 30th of April.
The entire automotive sector value chain is affected, specifically the smaller business in the crucial components sector.
Maybe some of our big manufacturers, just like the OEMs, are able to cover things a little bit longer than you would find with some of the smaller, especially South African-owned companies.
While all businesses in the chain are suffering locally, the restart when it comes isn't straightforward. Global demand is expected to be 30% less initially.
Demand has slowed down, throughout the world for new vehicles, and we are seeing a situation where the return is definitely not going to be full scale. We'll certainly be looking at different permutations in terms of coming back into production.
The companies previously invested capacity and employment and based their production models on X demand. If X drops by 30%, then you can fairly reasonably expect that employment and businesses linked to X projection could see up to 30% reduction because you're not going to need that. You're not going to need that capability.
As the ramp-up of production begins, the auto sector will be focused on its viability.
Biggest priority now is certainly to try and spare jobs as much as possible as we can. We don't want to people to lose their jobs unnecessarily because of the situation that we find ourselves in.
There's no question that the auto sector in South Africa is going to be changed when the country emerges from this lockdown period. Now the question is how many people are going to remain employed. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, still to come. The IMF says the global economy could suffer its worst year since the Great Depression. And in Russia, florists are forced to destroy their products due to low demand.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges. from grassroots to big businesses.
Global Business
takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Now here's a quick recap of today's top headlines. Uganda has extended its coronavirus lockdown and curfew for another 21 days as it fights to contain the deadly virus. Now, the country's Ministry of Health says it still needs to test over 18,000 travelers who arrive in the country in March. And Somalia has announced 35 new cases of the novel coronavirus, the highest daily increase since the first positive case was diagnosed last month. There are now 60 confirmed cases in the country. President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo has called on the nation to observe social distancing and health directives in order to curb community transmission. And aid agencies are warning that more than half of South Sudan's population is facing a serious food shortage and that the situation might get worse as the global coronavirus pandemic continues. South Sudan's government says it's concerned that food insecurity in the country could lead to cattle rustling and intercommunal violence. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, the International Monetary Fund says the global economy may suffer its worst year since the Great Depression. It has urged countries to join hands to eliminate the spread of the coronavirus. Under the report, global growth is projected at negative 3% in 2020. That's far worse than during the 2009 global financial crisis. It also estimates that growth in the advanced economies should be at negative 6.1%, while growth in emerging market and developing nations is projected to contract by negative 1%. Meanwhile, the report noted that effective policies are essential to forestall worse outcomes. First, resources should be prioritized for healthcare systems. Second, policies will need to limit the propagation of the health crisis to economic activity. And finally, policymakers need to implement targeted measures to help affected households and businesses. Now, key U.S. states have formed regional pacts on a gradual reopening of their economies amid the pandemic. This includes 7 in the Northeast and 3 in the West Coast. New York, the hardest hit area in America, is planning to work closely with nearby states in order to devise a strategy to ease stay-at-home orders. Now, some other states have also announced plans to lift social distancing measures. CGTN's Nathan King reports from the White House.
The death toll and number of cases continue to rise in the US from COVID-19, but hope is that these numbers will soon fall and plans to reopen the US economy are taking shape. California, Oregon and Washington on the West Coast are coordinating. New York and 5 other states on the East Coast are doing the same, learning lessons from other countries that are opening up.
You look around the world, you see warning signs from countries who have opened. And my point is to our team, I want to learn from those other countries. We are easing isolation. We want to increase economic activity. That will happen essentially through a recalibration of what are essential workers.
But the US president claims it is he who will decide when the US economy will start again. In a series of tweets and at his daily coronavirus task force meeting, Trump insisted it was his call.
The President of the United States has the authority to do what the President has the authority to do, which is very powerful. The President of the United States calls the shots. If we weren't here for the states, you would have had a problem in this country like you've never seen before. We were here to back them up.
President Trump is also set to unveil his counsel to reopen the US economy. Included are his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. The presence of the president's family member on this team to reopen the economy is leading to a lot of criticism, as are the public divisions with his top health advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci. But still, every day, the president is in front and center of the press here at his daily coronavirus briefing, hitting back at his enemies, perceived or real. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Now, while most Chinese manufacturers have resumed production, many of their overseas clients have had to delay or even cancel their orders due to the pandemic. That's posed additional challenges for Chinese exporters who are now forced to find ways to remain competitive. Here's CGTN's Wu Lei with more.
Lots of our European customers are telling us that they want to delay the shipments.
95%都出口于伊朗。 订单有40-50%已经取消了。
March and April used to be a busy season for these garment manufacturers and exporters from Shaoxing City in South China's Zhejiang province. But no longer, after business was adversely affected in recent days, after the effects of COVID-19 were felt in more countries and regions.
In February, when our overseas client didn't feel the effects of the pandemic, they asked when we could resume production and ship the goods. But since last week, many of them want to delay or even cancel orders.
Hu Zuling has been making and exporting garments for over 12 years. He said he has never seen such a crisis, which he felt was even worse than the 2008 financial crisis and the 2003 SARS outbreak. To help exporters, many Chinese banks have lowered lending rates, but some say more further measures are needed.
We hope there can be more tax and rental reductions, which can relieve some of our operational pressure.
Apart from turning to national administrative and monetary measures, exporters also realize that they need to explore new growth areas by themselves. Many Chinese exporters say it is hard to predict when the overseas market will recover. But in the meantime, what they can do to brace themselves for the worst is to adjust their product manufacturing and market strategies. Many companies have not only reduced their productions and designs, they've also conducted trainings to explore more domestic and other emerging markets.
During this time, we can do some training work to our sales team and to develop some new market And also we are doing domestic market.
We used to develop new styles, but now we have to suspend or lower costs. We will also expand our domestic markets.
While other businesses try to discover new growth areas, Hu Zuling has chosen to purchase machines to produce face masks, which are in huge demand around the world.
Besides exploring domestic markets, I want to turn the face mask manufacturing into a new part of my business, which can help to stabilize the company's operations.
Many Chinese exporters are likely to suffer if the pandemic cannot be effectively contained. A Chinese proverb says there's an opportunity in every crisis. The opportunity in this crisis lies in their quick reaction and their ability to meet market demand. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shaoxing City in Zhejiang Province.
Now, the coronavirus is dealing a deadly blow not only to the global travel industry, but also the global cruise industry. It did enjoy years of fast growth, especially in Asia, along with the surge in Chinese middle class. But analysts now fear the pandemic could erase years of growth and set the industry in overcapacity. Can the cruise line industry recover from the crisis? And if so, how? CGTN's Zhang Shishwan has more.
All three of the world's publicly traded cruise lines, Carnival, Norwegian, and Royal Caribbean, have suspended operations because of COVID-19. Shares in the companies have sunk more than 70% so far this year. Smaller lines are also facing cancellations, rebookings, and refunds. And unlike firms in some other industries, the cruise lines have continuing and major cash flow problems.
And you still have to employ the minimum crew members to man the ship. You still have to buy the insurance, the minimum insurance. You still need to buy the bunkers to run through the main engine and the auxiliary engine and other equipment on board. It's quite expensive to maintain those ships. I would say even you don't use those ships, you still need to put money, about 20 to 30% of the normal operation costs.
On top of that, unlike airlines that can benefit from government bailouts, most cruise ships are not registered where they do business, in the US and Europe, but rather offshore in locations like Panama and Bahamas. The industry does that to avoid tax and to recruit cheaper labor. But that hasn't worked out well during the COVID-19 outbreak, because the offshoring means they are not eligible for government bailout schemes. Whether the cruise industry can recover depends not only on containing the virus, but on regaining customers' trust, given the well-publicized lockdowns that several ships and their passengers have endured when COVID-19 was discovered aboard. Experts say upgrading ships' equipment could help.
They need to improve not only the service, but also improve the infrastructure of the cruise ships. I mean that maybe the airflow system, not only the air conditioning, but also the central ventilating system. This should be improved a lot.
Government could also play an important role in restoring confidence in cruise ship travel.
How to protect yourself, those information, how to protect the passengers themselves when they're on board the ships. If the government can do that education or circulation of information, then people may maybe trust the cruise travel again gradually, but not suddenly. We still need about half a year at least to reinstall the people's momentum to travel alongside those cruise ships.
China's Ministry of Culture and Tourism ordered all travel agencies to suspend sales of domestic and international tours at the end of January. Experts here say domestic cruise ship travel could resume operations more quickly than foreign operations as the spread of the virus is almost under control in China. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, the global flower industry is counting losses amounting to millions. And of course, Russia's sector is no different. With the accumulating concerns over a slump in demand and orders, many have been forced to destroy the same products they were hoping to earn a revenue from. Well, here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson with more on that story.
Russian florists are counting losses as they are forced to destroy 1 million flowers daily. The coronavirus-induced slump in sales has affected the industry as fears of worse effects continue to rise.
This is a small part of what we have thrown away. It is our money that we got on credit. We want to be included in the list of affected businesses because we suffered catastrophic losses. We have lost millions.
Non-essential shops have been ordered to shut down operations. Many florists are now fighting for survival as they turn to online sales in an attempt to recoup some of their lost revenue.
Now we can't compose a bouquet. We have no place to make a bouquet. So we sell roses in our online shop in packs just as they were wrapped during production. Just like we do with wholesalers. We sell it to people but as a wholesale product. People just get packs, so they have to compose a bouquet themselves.
The downshift of demand leaves no room for excess inventory in such an environment. According to the Russian Greenhouse Union, 1.2 million roses are being destroyed daily.
We didn't know where we would be supplying flowers because all the flower shops were closed. In this regard, we had to sharply lower the temperature in the greenhouse in order to somehow preserve our flowers. This impacted the flowers. They began to grow oddly because they're alive. They feel everything.
Producers are also faced with a drop in profits due to the hefty discounts aimed at boosting sales. The slashing of prices has put employees and companies at risk.
Since all sales channels have disappeared, we only have sales in the online store. For us, these are very small sales. This is less than 10% of usual sales. It's nothing. We simply posted a call on the internet saying, "Help, we have made a very low price. Please buy if you can." I had a specific problem: how to pay salaries to people. It is clear that everything will be closed, that it will be like everywhere in the world. I generally had such a fear about paying salaries.
With the global flower industry reeling from millions of losses, many producers are hoping for a turnaround that could rescue the sector. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices edging lower, with Brent crude falling over 3% on the day. Now, investors apparently are unconvinced that record supply cuts could soon balance markets. However, a predicted plunge in U.S. shale output did provide some support to prices today. Meanwhile, gold rising to a more than 7-year high on rising fears of a steeper economic downturn globally as a result of the pandemic. Now, those concerns about the economic outlook have been particularly supportive for gold prices. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. Some 1.5 million Egyptians will receive a monthly stipend from now till June.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Egyptian government has begun distributing a monthly stipend to about 1.5 million people. Each beneficiary will receive $32 a month until June. Now, the government is trying to cushion those most vulnerable to the economic slowdown, which has been caused by the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Adel El Marhoui talked to some Egyptians who've applied for that stipend.
57-year-old Karam Abul Wafa is quite excited to have a client. With the COVID-19 social distancing rules imposed and the lockdown during weekends, he'd be happy if he gets 2 visitors to his small shop.
For 47 years, I've been working continuously, never took a day off. For an old-born like me, it's very hard to stay without work or even stay at home. Forced to shut over the weekend was difficult and it had a huge effect on my income. It shrunk by 75%. I don't know until when I can sustain that. It shrunk.
Karam takes care of 2 families, his own and his sick brothers. When he heard about the COVID-19 day laborer's stipend, he applied on behalf of his brother.
I have applied immediately. It's been 12 days and we haven't gotten a response yet. I will give that whole sum to my brother and I'll try to manage. It's a great initiative from the president and it's a good step.
The government has started releasing a $96 stipend distributed over 3 months. Nadia is one of the millions in dire need of this grant. She hopes she'll be one of the 1.5 million beneficiaries of that program.
People are afraid to touch newspapers. They fear infection. So the situation is hard. I barely earn anything from newspapers. These are hard times for everyone. Many used to help me out. Now even those people need help. $32 will make a difference. In these times, they have become of value. I just hope I can get them. I'd be happy.
All applicants are anxiously waiting to receive an SMS from the government. Once accepted in the program, the message will include instructions to receive the stipend. 5,700 government outlets will be releasing the grant during the coming days all over Egypt. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, before we go, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand was weaker as investors digested an unexpected interest rate cut by the Reserve Bank. Now, the currency had posted some gains in early trade as, of course, riskier currencies were lifted by trade data from China. But the rate cut clipped the currency's advance today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.